On this channel, we often discuss the good old days of MMOs, and how much we miss that magic that modern titles seem to have lost somewhere along the way. Final Fantasy XI was, in my opinion, one of the best of its era, and in this series we're going through some of the details that really elevated it above its competition. In the last video I dove deep into how Final Fantasy XI's slower combat speed really opened it up to be a more social and ultimately interesting game, and I'll link that video in the description below. But this week I'm opening up on abilities and spells, and how the speed at which they were learned just kept you coming back for more. So hey guys, it's Hunt4Games, bringing you as always a healthy mix of videos on new releases and MMOs, and nostalgia trips for the classics that made us fall in love with games in the first place. And with those nostalgia trips often come back and forth about those intensely memorable abilities from Final Fantasy XI. Weapon skills, job-specific spells, tools that defined jobs, literally unforgettable moves that years later people will still tell you first encounter stories of. I remember the first time I saw a Stone 4, a light skill chain, a first Viper Bite, first time I ever saw Fenrir, first time I ever summoned Carbuncle, first wheeling thrust, first party with Refresh. I could go on for hours, which is why the rate at which you gained those abilities was crucial to what made 11 great. So lots of RPGs and MMOs have abilities, but why was Final Fantasy XI so special with it? First off, they were just visually exciting. Weapon skills are still to this day one of the most visually amazing things that I've seen in MMOs. And honestly, the game's 16 years old, they hold up great. The spells looked fantastic, they were distinctly different as they increased in power from the tier 1 spells all the way to the tier 4 spells. And by the time you reach tier 4, they were insanely cool looking. They just would explode on the enemy with this elemental fury. It was awesome. You wanted to see it over and over again. Even common abilities like Berserk, Sneak Attack, had cool animations that you didn't mind seeing over and over again. And if I can briefly touch on it, amazing sound effects that just kind of drove home those abilities. To this day, if I hear them, I can probably tell you which are which just by sound alone. But as we've seen time and time again, the visual nature of these abilities and spells aren't what keep people coming back to an MMO like Final Fantasy XI. But honestly, the performance increase, the personal growth, the difference between a Viper Bite and Dancing Edge, that did. Final Fantasy XI was amazing and had these milestones that changed how you could perform drastically. One level you'd just be an average player, maybe you felt like your job was getting a little weaker than it had been a few levels before, and then all of a sudden you'd gain a new ability, a new weapon skill, a new spell, and then you'd be seemingly more powerful than you'd ever been. Those moments are like crack. You just were like, oh my god, that felt so good. And then slowly over time, you'd be weaned off that feeling. You just sort of come to expect the damage you were doing, expect the speed at which you can now perform your role. And then all of a sudden you get hit with it again with something new. And it just was like this constant refreshing feeling of, oh my gosh, I'm getting so much more powerful than I was. So by the time you hit 75, you truly felt like a badass. When Black Mages first got access to ancient magic, I mean, how can I explain this? At one moment, you can cast a bunch of lower tiered spells for decent damage for high MP cost, and then all of a sudden you have ancient magic, which takes like 30 seconds to cast, but if you magic burst it, will literally take out half of an enemy's health. That's absurd. The entire way that you approach your game shifted, if you wanted to focus around that new spell. You could set up freeze macros, starting your casting early, then there would be a skill chain in the middle of your cast, and you'd close with a freeze, and your whole party would be built around that concept of the Black Mage casting one freeze every fight and doing half the damage to the enemy. And it was really cool, but he could only do it with the support of the other players. And Black Mages would get excited. They'd hear those stories, and they'd be like, wow, I can't wait to hit level 50 so I can get freeze and start doing parties like that. And then you'd get it and you'd be like, wow, I wonder if this changes how we can do some missions and stuff now that I have access to freeze. The first time that you got a weapon skill that could open or close a light skill chain, it changed everything. Previously, people only had access to tier 1 or 2 skill chains, which were still good damage, but light and darkness were severely higher in damage capability, and also could be boosted on by 4 elements instead of just 2, allowing Black Mages, Red Mages, Scholars to really hone in on the enemy's weaknesses. This also had the adverse effect of the level before when you knew it was coming. If you're right on the cusp of really drastically changing the strength of your job, you felt like, ugh, like, oh my gosh, I don't even want a party like this. I feel so weak compared to some of the things I'm seeing other players do. But once you got it, it felt so amazing. But it's not just abilities, spells that you could use, there were also job traits that were kind of secretly thrown in that you get every few levels. I mean, what about like double attack? When Warrior got access to that, it changed how fast they could gain TP pretty drastically. It's like a 25% double attack rate. Summoner got auto refresh, which allowed them suddenly to engage a little bit more every fight without totally whittling through their MP pool. These traits, abilities, spells always felt like there was something that was kind of close on the horizon. It may be a few levels away, which in Final Fantasy XI could be a lot of time, but you still wanted to get there. And those few level spreads were often kind of beneficial because it was spread out enough that you could learn and master your new abilities that you just learned while leveling to your next milestone. Thieves would have a full 15 levels with sneak attack before they even had to worry about trick attack. They could fully master the understanding of where they have to position themselves behind an enemy to really do that damage. If they got sneak attack at 15 and then trick attack at 16, they'd still be trying to figure out the first one while simultaneously integrating their new ability. Leveling took so long in Final Fantasy XI that was rarely a problem because you usually didn't get hit with a ton of stuff at once. And while the number of abilities or spells that a job has access to might seem comparatively low when considering modern games, sprinkled in there were also new weapon skills and obviously sub-job abilities. And I mean some of which were useful, some of which weren't. Everybody's had a few levels of bad weapon skills. I mean, poor Thief has Viper Bite and uses it pretty much straight up through Dancing Edge at level 60. That's level like 33 all the way to level 60. But that's what made those milestones so interesting, and sub-jobs just doubled down on that. By changing sub-jobs, you gained access to all the tools of the sub-job at half your level. Now, not only was 15 interesting for warriors because they just earned Berserk, but 30 was interesting to everyone subbing warrior because they also got Berserk. And instead of the game just providing that ability, it felt like a choice that the player was making. I'm choosing to level warrior and then sub it on my other job, so I have Berserk at level 30 while other people might not. Yeah, there were usually limitations on how many jobs were useful, and that might change due to updates and everything else, but honestly, the choice really was up to the player, and we sort of started pigeonholing people into specific roles and sub-jobs. And those sub-job choices could shift throughout the levels. You might do warrior early on, and then you'd switch to ranger for the accuracy bonus, which would only last a little bit before warrior got better again with double attack, or maybe you'd switch to ninja so you could dual wield. There were so many options based on personal preference or party need. It was incredible. I loved the sub-job system. But we'll go more into the sub-job system in another video. But these support job abilities and even just the main abilities that you get throughout the game, this was an era where a job ability could very literally change how a job played. Before 30, a thief was nothing special, even with sneak attack. I mean, the damage output was pretty low. After 30, it was a cooperative damage dealing powerhouse that required tight coordination with intensely high damage rewards. Because you could maximize your skill chain damage, apply the hate to the tank, which would simultaneously increase the skill chain damage output significantly. It was just insane. Samurai under 30 was just a warrior with a great katana, and honestly an inferior one at that. After 30, it was a TP building machine that was firing off weapon skills faster than any job in the game to that point. Red Mage before 41, a dispelling, underpowered White Mage. After 41, most desired job in the game. 73 for every job that dual wielded ever, most painfully slow level of your career. 74, you now have access to Utsumi Ni from Ninja Sub, and will probably never change that sub again. These drastic shifts in what you could do kept things so fresh and exciting. Too often games just slowly improve upon your character flow and design, so gradually sometimes that you almost don't even realize it's happening. While this eases concepts into players' hands, I really feel like I've suddenly gone from a weakling to a badass. And Final Fantasy XI game balance was amazing. It was constantly shifting the difficulty of the enemies you face, and then providing more powerful and life-changing abilities to match that. Final Fantasy XI kept you feeling like you were king of the world, and it was amazing. Level 39 and 40 for instance, you were just starting to feel that the MP pools were getting a bit hard to keep up. Your combat speed was going down, enemies were getting a little harder, they started to use buffs that drastically could screw you over. All of a sudden 41 hits and you've got bards and red mages that can refresh your MP pool, and you're like, wow, we can keep going even faster now. And for another 10-15 levels that felt pretty good, then things might slow down even more. It was this constant race against time, that you would get abilities that would make you stronger, but the enemies would be getting stronger too, so you'd feel amazing for a few levels, and then it would start to feel a little bit weaker again, and then it would circle round and round we go. I've just never had a game that had that kind of feeling of intense reward since. And these weapon skills, abilities, and spells were so memorable, had such a visceral impact when they would connect with the enemy or be fired off with significantly chosen sound effects that just enhanced it so much. I can't tell you how many times I've seen a player fire something off at like level 70 or 75, and I've leveled that job from 1 all the way to 75 just so I could do it myself. But I want to hear your thoughts. Have other games managed to improve upon this formula? Am I looking back at this with rose-colored glasses? Were there too many levels where nothing happened and it was just a boring experience overall? Or by providing too many abilities these days, have games kind of overburdened the player with too much and not making those changes significant enough to really engage the player? Keep on the lookout for more Final Fantasy XI videos where we revisit some of these classic concepts that made 11 great. I love chatting about it, and with games like Pantheon, Rise of the Fallen coming down the line, I like to see what made me love this game so much so I can look out for those traits in other games. Keep leveling, and I'll see you guys all in the next one. Peace. As always, guys, thanks for watching. If you haven't already, you should totally think about subscribing. I've got videos coming out twice a week, and if you like this one, there's at least a chance you'll like some of the others that are very similar to this, so live dangerously. Let me know what you guys thought about the video in the comments and other videos you'd like to see. And finally, follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Huntin for Games to keep up with all the latest stuff. See ya.